I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EAWorldView on Iran. President Rouhani, the Revolutionary Guards, and the hardline threat. Last weekend, President Rouhani made a very striking statement to a group of military commanders. He asked them, indeed almost instructed them, to refrain from hostile comments, threatening comments that might unsettle Iran's nuclear negotiations with the 5+1 powers. In particular, Rouhani was singling out statements that had been made warning that Iran could respond to any U.S. attack with an assault beyond boundaries that would wipe out Israel, as well as the American position in the Middle East. Rouhani, in effect, was telling the Revolutionary Guards and Iran's military to back off. The Iranians and the Americans, as talks on a comprehensive nuclear deal had opened in Vienna earlier this month, had agreed enough was enough. No more sniping, no more backbiting, no more talk of war if the negotiations were to proceed. But is that the end of the story? Will the Revolutionary Guards indeed shut up? Already this week, we have seen signs they will not. The spokesman for the Revolutionary Guards PR department has repeated the statements that the enemies of Iran cannot take on the Islamic Republic, that they are too weak in the face of Iran's might. Other military commanders are reiterating statements about missiles, exercises, other potential threats. We haven't yet had a replay of the statement made last month about a mighty Iranian fleet, 2 ships, off the coast of the United States, but you can't rule it out either. And that isn't even the extent of this. Look, if it was just Rouhani versus the Revolutionary Guards, that would make for a great headline, but it wouldn't necessarily amount to a political showdown. But if the Revolutionary Guards are allied to political opponents of the president, then you've got a story. Not just a story, but a situation. And as the Revolutionary Guards are considering whether or not to make their latest get tough statements, there's a group of politicians and clerics called the Endurance Front, which have no such doubts. Led by Ayatollah Mezbah-Yazdi, they have lashed out at Rouhani for being soft in the nuclear negotiations. They have criticized engagement with the United States. And in particular, this week, Mezbah-Yazdi said that Rouhani's proposed civil rights charter is a selling out of Iran to its enemies. Mezbah-Yazdi said, for example, that Rouhani is being soft. He's coddling members of the Baha'i faith. That menacing group, which has had hundreds of its members harassed, intimidated, imprisoned over recent years. Mezbah-Yazdi said that Rouhani was being soft on the Jews, the Zionists, that giving this supposed civil rights to Iranians was in fact appeasing the Zionist regime. Mezbah-Yazdi said that Rouhani was being soft on the enemies of sedition, the code for those people who came out in their millions to protest the disputed 2009 presidential election. This is not just the empty statement of an elderly, outspoken cleric. Mezbah-Yazdi helped organize the Endurance Front in 2012 to run in parliamentary elections, not as part of the conservative establishment, but as a challenge to it. They criticized President Ahmadinejad, called his group the Deviant Current. They, of course, said that reformists were outside the bounds of acceptable politics. In other words, this is a group that puts the hard into hardline. Now, this is to say that Mezbah-Yazdi, in a one-on-one confrontation with Rouhani through the ballot box, could win. But if you ally his political challenge with a challenge from the Revolutionary Guards, then Rouhani may find himself facing a very powerful domestic opposition. Is that likely to happen? Well, so far, there's one very important reassurance for Rouhani. Despite the get tough statements of the Revolutionary Guards, denouncing the United States, threatening the attack on the Americans and the Israelis, despite the statements of Mezbah-Yazdi saying that Rouhani is soft on political and social opponents of the regime, the Supreme Leader still stands behind his president. That's right. Ayatollah Khamenei has endorsed the nuclear negotiations with the United States and with the 5+1 powers. And if those negotiations do not break down, then he has no incentive to ditch his president. But that's a big if. If at any point the United States chooses sanctions rather than talks, if at any point the 5+1 powers demand what the Supreme Leader sees as a capitulation rather than a negotiation, then he can swing his support behind the Revolutionary Guards and behind the hardliners. And Rouhani goes from security to being threatened. I'm Scott Lucas, and this is today's EA Worldview on Iran.